And good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of OK Boomer Live. I'm your host. You can call me Lapel Pin Guy, also known as Steve Ferreira, and my day job is CEO and founder of Ocean Audit, a ocean freight recovery auditing firm. And I'm based in Hartford, Connecticut, although I have lived and traveled all around the world for my profession, spending 25% of my 59 years living abroad. So it's a pleasure to be here today in Hartford and talking to you about some of the big movements we're seeing in the container shipping sector. I am just really pleased that we have today our special guest, Lars Jensen, who will be joining us in about 15 minutes. And today, in the first half of our show, we're going to talk about some of the more interesting trends I'm seeing in the recovery phase of COVID as it relates to retail moves. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about retail moves that we're finding is that, believe it or not, a lot of the big ticket items in terms of big container movers are not toys, right? So you're not seeing at this phase, in my proprietary statistics, a strong amount of toys and games and what you would see in prepping for the Christmas season. So those goods have yet to come in yet. And we're looking at a completely different set of uh, really eclectic merchandise that I think the heads of merchandising at our featured stores today, Amazon, Target, Walmart, and one other um, really hidden gem, and I'm going to save it for the presentation. But actually, it's that hidden gem that I kind of like the best because I think it's the perfect COVID story. So as we start our program today, let me just jump right into the screen sharing, and we'll start our presentation before I interview Lars Jensen, CEO of Sea Intelligence. So let's go and begin, and we'll talk about. I'll start to share my screen with you, and we will get into today's topic, today's program. So let's start right away with talking about the elements at hand in in the retail merchandising and the large scale buys that the retail merchandisers, the retail stores are doing. And when I say big buys, I'm talking about large chunks, large blocks of cargo. We're talking about 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 or more containers on a given invoice. And these are very dynamic for me to understand in terms of the movers and shakers of why these products are coming in and the dynamics behind them. Let me just go full screen here to make it a little more efficient for you. Um, so in looking at the dynamics of the large scale movements, I took a look at the last 10 days of activity in the Trans-Pacific. And one of the things I found is that we had a horrible May where we were down about 30% in volume, May to May, 2020 to 19, of course, COVID recovery. What I'm seeing in the last 10 days, and I'm going to talk to Lars about it, is really astonishing. In the last 10 days, import volumes in terms of number of container invoices issued, which I think is a really interesting metric, is almost equal to what it was last year and the 2018 year of tariff and front loading. So I'm seeing a surge and a strong surge right now. And it's interesting whether or not some of this is related to geopolitical influences post COVID, merchandisers focusing on the right big ticket items that can move both in store and in e-commerce. So let's take a look at some of the items. And here's my first um, Easter egg I like, and I'm going to explain this in a second. So Genuine Parts, excuse me, has a variety of different companies under their parent umbrella. And Genuine Parts, great company, has recently had one shipment where there's 62 containers of brakes and brake parts. Um, on the invoice, on the container shipping invoice. And it's just a fantastically huge amount of containers. And I first, I first discarded it, and I said, I love Genuine Parts. They're great folks. Love the whole team there. Know them well. But it didn't fit into my retail theme. But then I said to myself, Steve, it's crazy. This is the best story. And here's why. It's because their merchandisers were brilliant on this. Think of the fact that gas was so cheap, right, in COVID, but we didn't use our cars. We went nowhere. We had cheap gas, but we went nowhere. Our cars were in our driveway. And now, as we start to get out of quarantine, we're using our cars. So it's an aha moment. What's the first thing Joe or Jane says? Oh, got to get the car checked. Oh, haven't used the car in a while. Oh, squeaky brakes. Oh, I got that long commute again. I just think having the inventory coming out now, these goods just arrived a few days ago, or a week ago, excuse me. So I think that I'm going to give them an A+ for predicting the market and having the right amount of stock in hand. I love all the auto parts supply guys, friends, and they're my clients. I have to hand off GPC. This is just a fantastic move, and I hope it helps you to see how merchandising and ocean freight are hand in glove, and smart merchandisers can do the right thing. So truly, truly love this story. Matter of fact, I think I'll have to check my brakes. So GPC is really my dream, was my dream slide because it's a really great COVID theme. One of the things that is also a COVID theme is this particular commodity at Target. And I was speaking to Lorianne LaRocco at CNBC, and we were talking about, the home office themes. Look at Wayfair. I mean, I try to buy stuff from them all the time. It's sold out. Look at high-tech stuff. It's sold out, right? And I think as more of us get comfortable with working from home, it's tough to repopulate the home office, go from the home office back to a headquarter type approach. I see Michael Ford out there from BDP, a shout out to him. And I know Michael and I talk about working from home versus the office. And anyway, this item was really interesting. One of the things that Target does, and again, these are the tea leaves that I, as an expert, read into the behind the scenes of products coming in. So Target does a great job kind of like protecting their stream, right? Their supply chain stream. But because everything comes into the country, even though it is made in somewhat of semi-private status, because Target is really keen on no one seeing what they're coming in, I basically have visibility to basically every Target shipment. And that's because one of the things that Target does is they leave a little bit of a breadcrumb in this DCPI, which is a digital code for a SKU, right? And so when you hide Easter eggs in shipping or container manifests, there's a pattern and trend that allow big data analysts like myself to pull out the data. And so I thought this was interesting that even though Target and Walmart and Amazon do a really good job keeping Wall Street and hedge funds away from what they're doing merchandising, that we can still have the ability to, bring out to the public what the big movers. And I think this one was really interesting, guys, because I wanted to address I wanted to go to the website. So I just wanted to stop the sharing on this one. I'm going to take you to the actual website on that particular item, because I think it's worth a look. So here again is the item, pardon me, that we just talked about. It's the hidden in the Target algorithm in the search box is the DPCI code. So I can just go in here in the search box, and I can basically, here you see all the DCPI codes I've been looking up. So I can actually go into Target and just say, hey, what's Target out of stock in? And I can match it up with an inbound movement. It's great for me to understand what's happening in the market. And when we talk to my good friend Lars Jensen, we'll be able to put some fidelity to that too. But let me just take you through this a little bit. I want to get rid of that little click. But here's the interesting thing. If you, I live in the metro New York area, but if you go down here in the where my mouse is hovering, deliver to zip code 10001, which I think is Madison Square Garden area, you see the item says temporarily out of stock. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting as you look at COVID type items. You want to get a jump on, if you're Amazon, right? This is kind of good to know that, hey, Target's bookshelves are out of stock and they're bringing in a ton of them. Maybe we can reduce our price on our Amazon and private label bookshelves and compete with Target, and and so on and so forth down the line. So I want to bring a new dimension to CFOs, CXOs, merchandisers, logistics. I want them all to communicate and be together and harmonize. And I want to help understand these subtle moves that that are three-dimensionalized that most people in the container shipping industry have no knowledge of. And again, this is an interesting item, right? Because again, it's it's something that you would need in a COVID, post-COVID, even a second wave, God forbid, type environment where we need storage and we need bookshelves and cases. So let me take you through the next item. Stop the sharing on that one. Go back to the deck that we're working from. I'm sorry, there's so much production value behind this stuff, guys. I'm solopreneur, as you know, and producer, director of all this stuff. So the next item, I'll take you through a few. I won't click on links on these, but large movement of tableware, right? This is lower value, cookware. People are eating more from home because of COVID. So 29 containers on one invoice. Here we see, this one was really fascinating. My son is going to, starting high school, going away to boarding school in September. And these are dorm refrigerators, right? And it makes sense, 19 containers for Target. And, this is a back to school, back to college type item. And it's interesting to see that the merchandisers are kind of betting on the come that these items, the schools will open as normal and these big ticket items are coming through. So this has just happened where there's, these dorm refrigerators, and then you see the DCPI number, and you just can go into that Target website, copy that number, and you'll see the items on the Target website. This next one was totally cool. I think that it's a car seat. Now, there's nothing necessarily exciting about it. It's just that there's 41 containers on this particular invoice. And the one thing I found on the invoice, and it was part of my Easter eggs that I found, is that there's 0% duty on the invoice. It specifically said 0% duty on these products. So my first thought process was that these are being rushed in. I think they came from Yantian or the Yantian area in China. And so could it be that bringing bulk waves in because of a potential backlash on Hong Kong or China tariffs? But again, I thought it was interesting that these items, again, based on shipping documents that I've been privy to, appear to be duty free. And perhaps that's the reason why they're coming in vast quantities, because it's certainly not a COVID type style recovery, other than the fact that you want to put two and two together and say, hey, I've got an auto, I've got a car, I've got new brakes, and now I need, new car seat for my kid, because the other one was, covered in mildew from lack of use. So I don't know about that, but I want to take you through this program fairly quickly so we have time for our special guest. But moving on to Walmart. So this one to me was really interesting. This is barbecues, and now they have different varieties of barbecues. This is 71 containers on one invoice. So it tells me that, again, it's 4th of July. There's some relaxation on COVID. I think the merchandisers on this one did as good a job as the ones at GPC on the brakes, because this is a pretty high valued item. I'll just take you to the website real quick on that particular item. I wanted to categorize it separately for you. Let's take a look at that. And I just thought this was like an interesting item. At first I thought it was a video game when I saw the item. But there you can see it's a Pit Boss broiler, pretty high value, and tons of them coming in, right? So that says that Americans are ready to open the pocketbooks. Unemployment wasn't as bad as it was. Family gatherings, we're going to be okay. Maybe no second wave. So I think the merchandisers took a good chance on this item. I think that this item is at the right time, the right place, and hats off to Walmart's merchandisers for getting it in such large quantity. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to see how well it sells. So let me move this on. I'll disconnect that screen and just get right back to finish up our last item. Oops, I think I didn't share the screen on that one. There we go, share the screen. And we're back in business. Okay, so we're cooking with gas, literally, right, on that last item. So moving on Walmart, this is another big ticket item. Again, similar to the bookshelves at Target, we see these cube organizers. These are pretty low cost items, and obviously they'd be well in any home office for artifacts, decorations. You know what I just thought of, guys? This is kind of like that, trend now in social media. Like, I've got the super nice background now, and I think a lot of people are doing like these background. This is a great background wall, if someone wants to put their awards or artifacts on. So I think that these are all kind of, actually, you know what? My hat's off to Walmart. I think that's what this is for. I think it's a background organizer for video. Makes a lot of sense to me. And then just kind of completing the loop on Walmart, they have a lower value price point on these barbecue grills on another charcoal grill, 21 containers. Oh, and by the way, too, I wanted to point out, how does Walmart, Walmart takes great pride, obviously, to keep their data pretty tight. But one of the things that Walmart has traditionally for the last 40 years or so is a list of department codes. So Department 1, Department 2, all the way to Department 100. So you can see here Walmart lists their department numbers on their shipping invoices. And even though it excludes all Walmart other identifiable data, you're able to see that it belongs to Department 16 or Department 71. So if you look at the previous slide here, you can see here the cubes were Department 71, and the grills are 16. I think 16 is Home and Garden Department. So it gives, I think, Wall Street hedge funds the ability to, really get down to what the big retailers are doing. And finally, Amazon. And I just thought it was interesting. Amazon has had a large SKU of alcohol wipes come on in the last few days, 20 containers worth. So, bullwhip aside, the supply chain's working and they're back in flow. And I thought this was an interesting item. They are portable air conditioners, obviously for home office use. These are really interesting. I think they're made by DeLonghi and Black & Decker. There's some kind of consortium here, but in the shipping data, the model number and SKU numbers were exercisable, so you can actually go right to the website and see those items and know that they're really belonging to Amazon. And last but not least on Amazon, just stunning. I don't know what we're doing with these bed frames, and I started to think, well, it's simple, right? People looking around, there's new sofas, new couches needed. Everyone's looking at their homes. Hey, that bed I sleep in every night, I'm in my bedroom 24/7 with COVID. How about a new bed frame? So the Zenus, or the Zinus, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. These bed frames from Zenus are definitely, up there in terms of Amazon's best sellers. 300 containers of this particular Lorelei bed frame this year versus 50 at the same period last year. So I think this is a COVID material that definitely the supply chain is looking at in terms of we need that for COVID recoveries, and we don't need the toys and the play sets necessarily right now. And that's why my remarks on toy sets and play sets not coming in now seem appropriate. Last but not least, this was maybe one of the more intriguing finds that I had, a large container, 13 containers of Amazon shopping bags. right? And I thought to myself, why does Amazon need shopping bags? And so they're coming out of the UK, a very famous large manufacturer. These come all the way from Bristol in the UK. And I can't cite for certain, but this may be a movement on Amazon Go, where they're upping the ante and getting the Amazon Go brand out there and more into the public, since it minimizes the contactless shopping, contactless shopping, and the opportunities that post-COVID give them in terms of looking at Amazon Go. But again, that's just speculative. I just thought, I've never seen bags, grocery bags, shopping bags coming in on Amazon. And I don't think these are for resale. So I could be wrong, but again, that's just my take on it. So I think that the last item was, this is fascinating. I don't know if you guys know this, but Wayfair has so many different private brands. Well, Amazon does too. They actually have a private furniture brand, and they particularly call this brand Rivet Revolve. I love the name, Rivet Revolve. And so, again, keeping with the category of home office, home improvement, they're seeing tremendous growth in their private label furniture. So I just thought that was interesting. And these have all come in the last 2 weeks or so, everything I've showed you today. So let me stop the sharing and hold on a second here and go back here to our live show. I am going to bring into the stream now a friend and colleague that you all know and love. For those that have not met him before, I'd like to introduce my special guest. You're watching OK Boomer Live. I'm Steve Ferreira, and I would now like to introduce you to Lars Jensen. Lars is the CEO of Sea Intelligence Consulting in one of my favorite cities in the world. Lars is in Copenhagen in Denmark, and between Lars and myself, we have 50 plus years in the industry. Lars has 19, 20 years working with ocean vendors, ocean carriers. He has a PhD in applied mathematical physics, and he's probably one of the smartest guys in the world I know. And Lars, I can't thank you enough for joining us today on OK Boomer Live. How are you?
Great, thanks, and thanks for inviting me, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's quite an honor to have you, and I know my audience is just tickled pink to have the chance to chat about a lot of the breaking news. So if you don't mind, why don't we get into it? And I'm sure we can accomplish a lot in the next 30, 40 minutes. That be okay?
Yep, fire away.
Okay, well, one of the things that I found in talking about the stats that I just went through with my ocean freight data is I found that when I did the analysis in May of 2020 compared to May 2019, I saw a 30% drop in aggregate ocean invoicing during that time frame. And now I took a look at the last 11 days in June, and believe it or not, based on my exclusive ocean freight audit data, I'm finding that the numbers in the first 11 days of June 2020 are almost identical to 2019 and also identical to 2018. So all of a sudden, I'm starting to see a demand come back and starting to see high levels of activity and movement, a la some of the shipping orders that I just shared with you. Given the fact that demand seems to be coming back, can you kind of tie into the theme of the blank sailings and how the carriers look at this increase in demand and how they'll start to relate bringing on more strings to satisfy demand?
Yeah. There's going to be a number of different answers to that because there's several moving parts going on at the same time. First of all, the carriers are reacting fairly swiftly to this increase in demand. You have seen over the last couple of weeks quite a number of sailings that were actually announced as blanked that have been reinstated in order to take care of this cargo. You have also seen carriers play this game exactly the way it should be played if you're a carrier. They started out several months ago. They would rather remove too much capacity than too little. That is working for them. We have freight rates that are substantially higher now than what they were last year at the same time, despite the collapse in demand. If you then look closer at what has been happening the last couple of weeks and what will happen in the next couple of weeks, I just ran through the numbers earlier here today. If you look at the Trans-Pacific and the Asia-Europe trades, the interesting thing here is you will this week, in the coming week ahead, see a substantial drop in the amount of capacity being pulled. There is still some blank sailings in the week here from Asia to US West Coast. 2 weeks from now, right now, there are no blank sailings. That has gone to 0%. But more interestingly, after that, we are back up to what I would call the new normal level of around 15% blank sailings.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that in 2 weeks from now, there's no blank sailings?
You can say, basically, yes. There's always a bit of periodicity, is it? Because you could certainly find some sailings that might be blank. I mean, it might easily take you a week and a half to go around Asia before the vessel leaves. So where do you put a stake in the ground and measure it? The way we make the measurements here, yes, 2 weeks from now. But, and there's a very large caveat that's important here. This is to the West Coast. When I look at the sailings from Asia to US East Coast, they are still blanking sailings, whereas we have seen a reinstitution of services to the West Coast. That is largely not the case to the East Coast.
Well, Lars, don't you think that is probably, I would say that is, from my audience's behalf, I would say that they have to find a way to get the goods in faster, so they're going on the more expensive option. So the demand isn't there. Is that probably one of the reasons why?
That might be part of it, but there's another thing that, and usually I like to be optimistic, but I am quite hesitant in believing the strong demand story. Obviously, I'm not disputing that the demand is there and filling the ships, but you've got to ask yourself why. Is this because you're seeing a structural surge of demand in US, a US where you still have tens of millions of people that went unemployed? I'm not sure. What I would rather say is the reason right now is a very short transient effect. What you are likely to see now is an effect where you have had a period here where, remember where I started, carriers would rather pull too much capacity than too little. So you've been through a period here where capacity has been tight, not because demand was good, but because the carriers pulled capacity. What do you do as an importer? So, well, should we book a lot of cargo now, or should we just wait and see? And furthermore, for the importers, they would likely have also put a complete sock in their ordering until they see how this shakes out. So what you're likely to see now is a very short temporary effect where the importers will also, okay, we probably pulled back a little bit too far when this crisis hit us. We're going to go slightly up the hill to get back to normal, and then we get back to normal. So what I expect to see here is, yes, you're going to see this surge. It's going to last a few weeks, and then we're going to go back to what I would call the new normal until we get the genuine rebound. And another thing why I think this is the case, you pointed to it yourself, Steve. Time is of the essence right now. So all this cargo goes on the West Coast. If this was a sustained structural resurge in demand in the US, you would see the same effect to the East Coast. You are not. If you look at the Asia-Europe trade, you do not see this effect at all. There are almost no reinstitutions of services. And there's then another effect compounding onto this. Remember, way back when China came out of their breakout of the virus before the rest of the world shut down, you had a brief period, late February, early March, where blank sailings also went to zero and you got a lot of demand. That was all the cargo that could not be exported when the virus was there. You are right now at a time where Europe is slowly opening up. India is opening up. You got a lot of the exporting markets that are opening up, which allows cargo that has been stuck there for a couple of months to be exported.
You know, you raise a really interesting point, because the one thing I mentioned is that my data shows that there's a lot of strength right now, but I didn't break it out East Coast, West Coast. So your point is highly appropriate, and I really appreciate your educating my audience on that, because I do think right now I think retailers are feeling pretty good. They're seeing, they're getting the stuff in, they're getting the merchandise in, they're getting warehousing, and I don't think they're necessarily thinking about that disconnect between the East Coast and West Coast, because a lot of them are just saying, hey, let's get our materials in. But switching gears for a second, you came out with a really interesting post on LinkedIn today, and I just thought it was terrific. And I wanted to mention it in light of a study I did. I did a study on, for example, Maersk Line. And I think my audience would be just really flabbergasted to see, if I was to throw out to you, what's the average profit per container that Maersk made in 2019? And the answer is, believe it or not, on aggregate, they made about $70 net profit per container in 2019. So I know that, the ocean industry is definitely looking for increases, and they're playing in the dark ages rate-wise. But you came out today on LinkedIn, and you talked about the Trans-Pacific container spot rates increasing to 27.55, a big jump. And a lot of that, it was attributed to the GRI that stuck this year, but it didn't stick a few months ago when it was introduced. So what's changed? Why are the carriers now successful at upping the spot rate versus a few months ago?
I wouldn't say they were completely unsuccessful a few months ago. It's been sort of a gradual development. They were just more successful this time around. Right now, you can say this week and last week, you had the confluence of this, let's call it a bullwhip effect of demand that I don't think is sustainable. And they have not really reinstituted the blank sailings yet. If you see this in a slightly larger picture, and that might also be relevant for your listeners here, because we are so used to a market dynamic where most of the time pricing power is with the shippers and not with the carriers. And then in a few glorious moments when the ships are full, the pricing power tended to be with the carriers, but those were the exceptions. What I believe we are witnessing now, and that's not because of the pandemic, it's just been accelerated by the pandemic, is a switch in the balance of power. This is not just due to the pandemic. Shippers should start to brace themselves for a new normal where the carriers will have a higher degree of pricing power than we've seen before. And the reason basically is because of this 20-year drive the carriers had to consolidate the industry. And let me illustrate this extremely simply. Think back to the financial crisis a decade ago. Rates tanked when demand tanked, but the market was fragmented. So picture yourself, you're a carrier. It's a fragmented market. You operate one service per week. Suddenly demand drops, say, 25%. What are you going to do? Well, you can blank your sailing, then you lose 100% of your volume, and your competitors get the advantage of this. That's not attractive. You can keep sailing and then try to dump prices to fill that underutilized ship. Then you have a price war. Fast forward to today, where you only have the three alliances. On Asia-Europe, for example, you would easily have 8 weekly services. Demand now drops 25%. What are you going to do? You're going to blank 2 of them, maybe even 3 for good measure. And then you get all the benefit yourself. The carriers are now, after 20 years of consolidation, at a point where they are indeed able to much better match capacity to demand. And it is not sudden that they figure this out. You have seen an increase in the use of blank sailings as a tool over the last 2 years. The carriers have gradually begun practicing with this. What the pandemic has done is it has forced them to move very rapidly ahead. But fundamentally, the balance of power is now switching in a structured manner. That does not mean you will never have price wars. Sometimes they will definitely occur. You will have individual trades where somebody might break ranks. But seen from a more holistic perspective, we should expect a rate environment where shippers will lose a significant degree of pricing power compared to what they used to.
Lars, one of the things that I like to do is I like to bridge the news in my sources, like Lodestar is, say what you want about the media, but we all follow people like Freightos and Lodestar and JOC. Lodestar came out today and said, quote, a further massive spike in Trans-Pacific container spot rates this week may encourage ocean carriers servicing the route to unblank more sailings to meet market demand. Would you agree?
Yes, I mean, that's what we're already seeing. As I was mentioning, you have very few blank sailings in this coming week, and you're going down to basically 0 the week after, but only on that one specific trade lanes where rates are spiking, not on the other ones.
Freightos said that carriers no doubt will be able, Etienne at Freightos, CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, said, carriers will no doubt hope that the current demand spike on the trade lane can be sustained. But Freightos is still saying that celebrating may be premature, given that demand on the route is still expected to lag through September. At this point, how do you see the lag? And is September about the right month?
The right month for, you can say, a comeback on demand, or what do you mean?
A comeback in demand in terms of, will we have a normal Christmas season?
I'm much more bearish on that. I have a hard time seeing a sustained pickup until January at the earliest. That is more from the perspective, if you wanted to have a strong peak season here, say in September, that's your Christmas goods. There was the toys you were mentioning and everything else. But that basically also means that all your importers, they should sit down here in July and August and make the decision they believe in strong Christmas sales. At a point in time where you still have a lot of people unemployed, they're still concerned about a second wave, would you necessarily bet the farm on a strong Christmas sale? What I believe is more likely is you're of course going to ship in goods. I mean, demand has not gone to zero. This is not the cruise shipping industry. And if you then find out you do actually have strong sales when you get into Thanksgiving and Black Monday, no, Black Friday, I can't remember what it's called, then you will see ordering, and then you will see the rebound coincide with the lead up to Chinese New Year. But that's the optimistic scenario.
Let me ask you a question. Let's just say that, for example, demand continues to be fairly robust and the carriers continue to do a good job using big data and AI to manage the capacity. So let's just say that hypothetically we start to move forward in the next few months and we see good demand. But yet we don't see the carriers releasing, more capacity, to maybe offset or to hypothetically open up, more space to demand projections. I guess my question is, could there still be a potential peak season charge or another GRI as the carriers try to claw back rates, or how do you see rate mechanisms going forward from this point on?
I would rather say that the Trans-Pacific rates to the West Coast now, I think they're a pretty good indicator in terms of how high is this going to go in terms of freight rates. I mean, this is the trigger point where you actually do see the carriers put more capacity in. So from that perspective, I think we are seeing what are the upper limits of rates. But I'm still also a strong believer that you are not going to see the rates collapse like we've usually seen when demand is down. And one way to maybe wrap your head around why is it, another argument, why is it the carriers are getting it right this time around? I did a fun little exercise here, that was about 5-6 weeks ago, to a very, very simple question. How much money are the carriers going to lose in 2020? Because clearly demand has dropped. And I sat down and said, okay, let's look at it in two ways. First of all, demand drop full year 2020 is likely going to be more or less on par with what we saw in the financial crisis. So what if, just what if, the carriers lose the volume? They can't help that, but they maintain freight rate levels. What will then happen? Well, last year, the carriers combined, all the big ones, they had a profit of 5.9 billion. If they lose the volume but maintain rates, their losses this year would be $800 million. Now, for me personally, $800 million is a lot of money, but in the greater context, yeah, it's a loss, but it's hardly a disaster for the carriers. On the other hand, if they acted like they did during the financial crisis and lowered rates to the same degree, then they would be facing $23 billion of losses this year. So for the carriers, the choice basically was, what do you want? Do you want to lose 800 million or do you want to lose 23 billion? And right now, the carriers are very much on track towards the positive scenario. You can actually argue they're on track to an even more positive scenario because they have not maintained freight rates. They have increased them. And look at two carriers, Hapag-Lloyd. They came out with their Q1 results. And what did they do for their expectation for full year? They reiterated their profit forecast. They did not lower it. Right. CMA CGM came out with their Q1 results and expected volumes to decline further in Q2, but profits to increase.
Lars, how do you balance? You wrote something very interesting, and we talked about, for those that don't know, OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Forecasting. You wrote about the fact of their prediction that there could be a second wave of COVID. When you throw in all the modeling, how does perhaps a second wave throw a monkey wrench in what you just said? I mean, Hapag's reiterating or restating their modeling for financials. But if a second wave comes in, what's next?
Well, the second wave, the impact of the second wave would be you would lower demand. And I am not necessarily sure that would throw that much of a monkey wrench in. For Hapag, they're
Wow.
not going to reach the upper end of their profit. That's what they already said. But what the carriers are very, very clearly doing here is saying, okay, if we lose on volume, we need to regain that on the freight rates. And the only way they can regain that on freight rates is very tight capacity management. And so far, they've been holding that tight for 4 months and it's working for them.
Well, this wasn't one of my planned questions, but let me ask you about that because I've been on the carrier side so many years before I started my business. To your knowledge, are the carriers using any kind of artificial intelligence, or what is the most sophisticated modeling that they're using to structure these models? Because I've never seen anything so disciplined before.
Yeah. In order for the capacity management, I would feel pretty confident of saying no. There is not any kind of artificial intelligence behind. There might be some relatively simple modeling behind, but that's about it. Because you're at a point where for the carriers to do this, it does not require sophisticated modeling. It requires the will to do it. And then we're back to why I mentioned before that when the market was fragmented, if a carrier did what was right for the market, they would be the ones losing out. It's a prisoner's dilemma type game. But with the consolidation, this game is a lot easier to play.
Lars, let's talk about something that you write a lot about, but I think that it sometimes gets lost in translation because BCOs had enjoyed a decrease in the the bunker fuel adjustment in June, but and of course the IMO spread was anticipated to be, I believe you wrote $200, but actually it's a blended average of somewhere near 60. Now, how can fuel and IMO and BAF play a role in either increasing or decreasing freight rates for the remainder of the year? What's your forecast?
Yeah, so far it has basically served to help the carriers. Again, this is where we are in, let's call it uncharted territory. Because if you look back over the last few decades and look at the numbers, it's always been extremely clear. Every time fuel prices drop, carriers give basically 100% of those savings over to the shippers within a few months. This time, that's not happening. The carriers, up until now, are successfully holding on to those savings. And on the topic of the BAF mechanism, from my perspective, it's not a very good risk management mechanism because it is not separate from the base rate. It never has been. There's always a spillover effect between the two. So are we seeing bunker surcharges and buffs go down now? Sure. But the all-in rates are not really going down. So there is simply a spillover effect between the buff and the freight rate. So how this is playing in right now is it's playing into the carrier's profitability. It is not being passed on.
Do you think that at some point, whether it's in a year or two, we'll see more dynamic pricing on BAF? I mean, I realize that some BCOs have their own BAF vehicle built into service contracts, but
Mhm.
in general, do you see more of a dynamic model that the industry will accept on BAF and IMO?
That is more tricky because that depends on who is the shipper you have in mind here. I think you're going to see a market that's going to evolve in a couple of different directions, where you're going to see the emergence of more and more of a spot market. You have, for example, Maersk and Hapag as some of the leaders in trying to get that one out. You have a NYSEX that tries to put enforceable contracts out. You're going to have part of the market that goes on spot, where this is just part and parcel of the price you pay. Whether you call it buff or not becomes immaterial. And then you're going to have large customers with large contracts that to some degree would still probably have their own individual buff structure. But then you have this gray pool in the middle that's going to bifurcate to one of the two.
Sure. And let me ask you that on the question of cost controls. And this is a perfect thematic question in terms of what you've said so far. You look at carrier costs, and I think Rolf at Hapag had come out with talking about carrier cost reductions and personnel staffing and all that. Certainly you've seen Kuehne+Nagel potentially talk about staff issues. I guess my question is, you look at great platforms like Maersk Spot and NYSEX. Do you see more of a movement towards the digitalization platforms and maybe the carriers taking the opportunity to unload some costs out of, let's say, their sales and marketing teams?
Absolutely, yes. That was already slowly beginning to happen. What we will see now is this will just go somewhat faster. Again, there are two sides to the coin. Because one thing we need to also realize in this digital drive, in the first iteration, it looks like a cost saving. Fine, if you can get people to do more self-service, if you get computers to do it, you don't need the people to do it, you will lower your cost. But that is only the beginning of the journey, because you also need to realize if you can automate it, you can copy it. So the guys who do it first, they will have a cost advantage for a little while until everybody catches up. Now, where does that then take you? It takes you to the point where it becomes a commodity and you can no longer make money. So you got to ask yourself the question, once you have digitized and automated everything that can be automated, how are you then going to make money? And that is where you need to start to look at, I would call them exceptions. It's always thought of when things go wrong, but it can also be the customer that wants something that is out of the ordinary, which you cannot automate. Then it comes down to the quality of the people you actually do have. So the number of people will be fewer, but the quality and skill level of those people have to be extremely high, because this is where your top line and your profit is going to be.
I think you're spot on, and I think one of the things that I remember Soren Sko came out a few years ago, and it's been a little bit lost in translation recently. But Maersk has really gone off and wanted to do all the LCL consolidation, and I think that you just hit the nail on the head. I've been writing a lot about ocean LCL, how profitable it is. You have a lot of clients that I have that do a lot of 100 purchase orders in one container, 100 bill of ladings consolidation. I think there's a lot of things that can be done with digitalization, but at the same time, I think they can up the ante on it by including many more ancillary services that are high profit deliverable. And you're right, it doesn't take the average salesperson to make that happen. It takes some excellent people to set that up with a BCO and to kind of monitor that through the digital phases. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and I would also say, I mean, usually my frame of reference is how would you compare it to something in your daily life? Now, we are now so used that we go online and buy all sorts of stuff online. Do we ever notice the service level? Well, we do. When do we notice the service level? When something did not go according to plan. That is where you can really win or lose as a business. That is where the ocean shipping industry is also going to go.
I want to. I put a little chart up, and I want to put it on for a second after we talk about this next point, because I think it's pretty relevant towards what's happening in the market right now. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you. This is a little bit of a challenging question, but I started to think about it, and I think I have my own ideas on where it's at. My question to you is, I'm looking at the percentage of cargo, right, moving under, let's say, contracts, moving under spots, moving by NVOCC. Do you can you take a wild stab off the dark in terms of, I think personally, the amount of cargo moving by contract is diminishing, and I do think the NVOs are picking up. When I say contract rates, I'm talking about direct BCOs with steamship lines.
With the carriers.
Right, but I do think that NVOs are in a prime position to take advantage of this right now, because those that were fortunate to get buy rates from the VOCCs in the 12, 13, 1400 range to the West Coast, 23, 24 to the East Coast, I think they're in great prime position to really marginalize that with their selling rates. But again, to ask you the question, how do you see the market spliced by direct contracts, spots, and again, NVO? Any comment on that?
No, because my question would then be, which market are we talking about?
Oh, well, I'm sorry. My customers are coming from a Trans-Pacific eastbound focus predominantly. So.
Well, I should know that. No, I'm not going to take a wild guess. I probably should know the number, but
it's no problem. Let's talk about this. Actually, is one of the slides I wanted to run through and kind of pulling it all together as we look at our agenda today. Let me just share this screen, and let me take us off the video and share the screen, and should be back in my deck here. And can you see that slide okay? Ocean freight impact on cost, Lars?
Yes.
Okay. So I just pulled an example. I'm looking at, my friend who's online right now, John Monroe. Shout out to John. We talk about, the essential retailers, the non-essential retailers. And, this is an example. And I just pulled, I don't know much about H&M department store. But I wanted to pull something from that was viable for our discussion today. So I pulled a shipment from H&M department stores. And in light of your comments on the current spots increasing, I would look at this four, really issues that a BCO, a beneficial cargo owner, in the Trans-Pacific eastbound can kind of look at, or which direction he or she can go, right? We just talked about, I was segueing into the NVO 3PL relief. So let's say they were late to get in on the contracting, and the spots are becoming so excessive. Obviously, there's that option, to move that cargo to an NVO. Some retailers, and again, this may go into the demand issue where, all of a sudden they're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place, and they have to either withdraw or cancel orders. I think the brilliant ones, are starting to refocus the product mix for what's the best selling, highest profit, SKUs in their quiver, right, in their basket of goods. And of course, they have the option that they adjust the retail price point. But the example I wanted to give at the bottom was that if you look at this one container of garments, garments on hangers, 3,400 pieces, the rate differential at 2,100 to 2,700. I look at ocean freight as the component, right? So the price per piece, how much of that garment was ocean freight? So under just a few weeks ago, right? It was 62 cents, and now it's 80 cents. So it's a 30% increase in really the ocean component that hypothetical company would experience. I just picked H&M just as the example. So at 1,000 containers, 3 million pieces of units, that's 600,000, but it's only 18 cents. So I guess I started to think, and my audience, would know a lot more than I would on this, is that, and here's where I'm agreeing with Lars, is that maybe it is okay, that these prices are settling in where the carriers can have good operational and deliverable services, provided that they do the right things in auditing and documenting and giving the client good invoices and good customer service. I think by far the metrics are still out that those are even happening. So that's a whole different issue in terms of the quality of services. But my question is that, or my comment is, maybe it's okay, if those goods are on sale at $30, H&M could make the decision to eat that. They could say it's now $31, and they could actually profit from that. And as you start to see a back to shopping consumerism, if you bundle that on an online sale and you've got free shipping, maybe the consumer is not going to notice that increased price point. And because, the reason why I thought of this slide, Lars, is that last night you and I had a conversation talking about, BCOs and CFOs are thinking, well, geez, the ocean rates are going up, they're going up, they're going up. But in reality, if you dumb it down to this 18 cents per unit, I mean, am I too far off from the truth in terms of like where I think a good team of merchandisers, finance people, and logistics professionals can bundle together and make this, turn this into a positive for the BCO? Your thoughts?
No. I think you're down the right path, and as I think with all my answers here, that there are two sides. There's a caveat, because the first step down, you're absolutely right. Usually, if you look at the full supply chain costs, especially if you take into account what is the cost of excess inventory, what is the cost of shipments not arriving on time, and all the different aspects, the raw ocean freight in itself is not necessarily the most important component, but it's the one that's very often focused on. Now, the challenge with this is, we've been through this cycle many, many times in the past. When freight rates go down, you will see the carriers have arguments to say, well, this is also why you get poorer service levels. You're not paying for it. With the underlying premise that when freight rates go up, then you can get faster services or you can get more reliable services. And I'm not going to go into this usual dance of blame game. Is it the shippers that don't pay enough, or is it the carriers that are not delivering? Because that has been going round and round for 30 years. You could have a hope this time is different. I would deliberately say hope, because then it would certainly break from the norm. What have we been seeing right now? As a tiny, tiny indicator, you could at least see, well, with the very high freight rates, what's the first thing that has happened? You have seen the establishment of another fast service on the Trans-Pacific. That at least points in the right direction. The second thing is the numbers that came out for schedule reliability in April showed improving performance. So whereas the expectation going into the crisis was that service levels would also suffer, that's actually not what the data are showing at the aggregate.
Well, I think you're right. I think that, one of the things you look at, I just read that, Siva is coming out with a new LCL Express service out of Shanghai. And I think that, with better selectivity and better decision making, NVOs are going to be, obviously putting more pressure on the carriers for adherence on on-time scheduling. John Monroe just points out to me that NVOs control 45% of the Trans-Pacific. So it's a massive amount of volume that these guys, NVOs, have as levers.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that only increasing. I really do. I think that the other thing John points out is really interesting. It's kind of a question and a comment, is that John doesn't feel that the market needs carrier digitalization, but he feels they need third-party digitalization that includes data from all modes, and we just need the carrier data through APIs. Any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, this is not a game between two entities. This is going to be an extremely interesting game. The way I think about this is, let's forget the huge BCOs here for a second and look at the relatively small to medium-sized ones, the ones that to a significant degree go through NVOs or other logistics providers today. What the digital transformation does is it opens up that battlefield. You have the incumbent NVOs, the incumbent logistics providers that then are upping their game on the digital in order to maintain control of their client base. You have the carriers that come in and say, well, why do you even go through the NVOs? Why don't you come to us? They want to regain part of that. Then you have let's call them the born digital freight providers that come in and say, we have a completely digital platform. They're now rapidly trying to build the physical infrastructure they also need to execute this. So this is a huge battle between multiple different entities in terms of, it's not about can you create more demand? You can't. It's a zero-sum game to some degree, but it's a fight over who gets to control these customers that today, to a large degree, are controlled over on the NVO side.
It's funny you say that. When I was at Sealand 20 plus years ago, I made the comment then, and I do now, that if I was going to start an NVO today, my NVO wouldn't have any clients in California. It wouldn't have any clients in New York or New Jersey. My NVO would have only clients in Dayton, Ohio, and Omaha, Nebraska, and Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a firm believer that America in the U.S., we have so many beneficial cargo owners in the 50 to 100, 250, 300, sub 500 TEU a year located in these cities.
Mm-hmm.
And the true fact is, and again, I don't think I'm stating the obvious here or giving away my trade secrets, but the clients in these areas, NVOs make $1,000, can make $1,000 profit per file, mm-hmm. versus $200 in the highly populated port areas, and a lot of it just has to do with getting good service, getting the reliability, getting the right pricing, and you can displace an incumbent pretty easy with some of those opportunities that you just mentioned in your previous statement. Lars, it's interesting. We're getting close to the bottom of the hour, and I can't thank you enough, and my audience does. You've been watching OK Boomer Live with special guest Lars Jensen, probably the #1 expert in ocean container shipping in the world. And Lars, I always like to leave the OK Boomer Live series or any transaction I do by giving my clients, my clients are really finance, supply chain finance guys, logistics pros, guys and gals. And I like to talk about maybe 3, takeaways that maybe can segue between the logistics suite and the finance suite. One of the problems that I found in being a TPM speaker and attending TPM is there's always this disconnect between what's going on in logistics and what the expectations of finance are. Could you give the audience maybe 3 things? So if you have a CFO in the room, a VP of logistics, and there's a discussion point, to be made, what would be three things that both of them should need to know that can
Yeah.
benefit their organizations right now?
One thing would be start rethinking how you are approaching negotiations with your providers. Start rethinking from the perspective that the reality of the past 20, 30 years where shippers most of the time had pricing power no longer holds up. That's clearly one thing.
Wow.
The second thing is for the more immediate future, establish your supply chains to be able to cater for very rapid, sudden removals, blankings of sailings. Because as long as we are in this pandemic mode, carriers react very fast. When the virus spread in China, it was literally within a week. When it started spreading elsewhere, it's again literally within a week. Up until last year, when the carriers were blanking sailings, there was at least a reasonable industry norm. Blankings would happen 3 to 4 weeks in advance, so you had time to prepare. As long as we are in the throes of this pandemic, services can disappear almost overnight. So you need to have a very robust and resilient setup.
And those are two. Any other important one?
I actually think those are the two most important ones as they are now, because the first one that stretches out a little bit longer, and if there finally was a third one, that is try to shift focus away from can we save $100, $200, $300 on the freight rate, and try to focus more on where is it we make the money on the service level. What is it we actually need here? Are there some who are better at providing that than others?
And when you look at that scenario that I just laid out for you, I am a firm believer that, unfortunately, in logistics and finance, we have very heavily siloed kind of categories there. Um, the discussion points that we need to have as BCOs, as importers and exporters, they certainly need to transcend both directions: finance, merchandising, and logistics, finance, and merchandising. Would you not agree?
Yeah, certainly.
I think that that's one thing that, when I look at some of my clients, I know I can think of one Fortune 100 company that's very famous for bringing their logistics VP into the boardroom to give regular updates. And I think that by doing that, you're able to not really give the last thing a CFO wants to have is any big surprise. And I think you just hit some really good strategy areas where maybe the VP or SVP of global logistics at a BCO starts to engage more on the finance guys, because at the end of the day, one of the biggest problems that I see is it's the finance guys that are signing off on these contracts,
Hmm.
and they're basically just letting the logistics guys execute them. They don't. The finance guys really have no teeth to understand the dynamics that you just laid out in the last
No, you,
45
you,
minutes.
you say the good ones are the ones where the finance guys understands that the value of logistics is more than just what's the freight spent. So they don't say, well, spot rates just dropped by 10%, so I expect your budget to go down by 10%. But understand what are the ramifications of this?
Yeah, I hate that when somebody writes on LinkedIn that they saved the company, $4.1 million. I mean, in the market that the rates went down 5 million. I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, and so I like the direction that you're bringing us into understanding this very technical subject down to the level where logistics managers, directors, and finance pros can all play together. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to spend time with you today. This has been very, very rewarding, and I'm so glad this is on demand and on LinkedIn and also on OK Boomer Live TV on YouTube for streaming. And we'll be able to give the links to everybody to rebroadcast this, because it's certainly something that people can't miss with the great intelligence that you brought through today, Lars. So I thank you for that. One last thing before I say goodnight to you in Copenhagen. I know it's late. Anything that we can look forward to seeing you in next? Any appearances that you'd like to let the audience know about?
Oh, that is a good question. I can't remember off the top of my head. So the only thing I would encourage your audience to, if they don't do already, join up and follow me on LinkedIn, where I give regular updates on everything I do.
Right, and I should tell my audience it's between Lodestar and my friend John Monroe and Lars. I mean, you're definitely the first thing I read after my morning orange juice. So, Lars, I want to thank you today. You've been an awesome guest, and will you come back to OK Boomer Live some other time?
Certainly, if you invite me again, it's been a pleasure being here.
Well, we're just totally thrilled to have you. I'm signing off now. This is Steve Ferreira for OK Boom Alive. And Lars, have a good evening. Audience, thank you so much for your kindness and viewership. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you, Lars.
Thank you.
Good night.